the theme. We did a panel last year, but this year we're going to talk about how we celebrate our loved ones, how do we celebrate the deceased, and how we can honor their legacies as communities and also adjacent communities, our family members and friends who might be religious. And how do we do that? What are the resources? How do we go about doing this so that we are able to properly prepare and celebrate our lives and have our loved ones do the same? Now, I will intro this by saying that this year is really impactful for me because my father passed away earlier this year, as well as one of our members, our long-term members of Black Nonbelievers, who died suddenly 2 weeks before. And I actually had the opportunity to work with his family on his life celebration. Everyone isn't as lucky in our communities. And as a recent celebrant, someone who's become a celebrant, it is important to me that people in our spaces, in our organizations, in our communities know that there are resources available and that there are people who will correctly honor their lives. And for those who don't know what that looks like and also advocating on our behalf, what that looks like for us is very, very important. And I am very, very happy to be facilitating this panel this time because I think it is important for us, again, to know what those resources are, to understand that there is support and there is help available. And I'm very, very proud to introduce our panelists. First, we had Srishti Hukku, who was just recently on, who we just recently heard from, and who is a humanist officiant who provides a range of ceremonies and services from child adult namings to weddings to celebration of life services. And she is a co-tutel doctoral candidate at the University of Ottawa's Population Health Program and the Medical Anthropology Program at Macquarie University in Australia. I'm also proud to have with us Zeena Regis, who she pronouns she, her, hers, who is a chaplain, consultant, and writer who recently started working as a community engagement on the community engagement team at Compassionate Choices. Zeena was recently selected as a 2021-2022 fellow in Collegeville Institute's Emerging Writers Mentorship Program. Her training includes a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Agnes Scott College and a Master of Divinity from Columbia Theological Seminary. Zeena is also a playwright, and her latest work, which I saw, which was very good, A Free Black Woman's Guide to Death and Dying, was selected for the Synchronicity Theater's Arts Incubator Project and premiered in May of 2022. It was a very, it was an excellent play. And thank you so much for writing it. So we're going to get this panel started. I wanted to ask a question to Srishti directly. So as a non-believer, what does death and dying mean to you and the community you represent?
Yeah, thanks, Mandisa. So I think death and dying is such a complex area, and it is so often, relegated to the dark. It's something that we're so scared to talk about. So I think I'll answer that question on two levels. So for me personally, I always feel like, oh my goodness, life is so short. There's just not enough time to do everything I want to do, which is really interesting as a humanist or as a non-believer, because it means that you wake up every day with this sort of passion for life and this zeal to just want to connect with people and do good and hopefully leave the world a better place. As I mentioned to you, in preparing for this conference, I had the opportunity to do the survey, and I did ask our membership about what they thought about death and dying. And what they shared with me was that they have this combination of a struggle between the very human fear of their mortality, of the fact that they do recognize that there is only one life, and at the same time, trying to be rational, reasonable people who emphasize, that there is no afterlife, to try and not sort of squish away these feelings or concerns that they have in convenient ways of trying to explain what happens next. So there was a real tension, I think, in the community in terms of trying to reconcile our emotionality and our rationality. And I think that's a really important piece for us to think about as non-believers.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that response. So the next question, I'd like to start with Zeena. And why should death and end-of-life preparation be an ongoing conversation, especially for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you. As Mandisa said, I just want to share this quick story. I started with Compassionate Choices in April. And as my part of the team, I go to a lot of faith conventions and things like that. And my boss, Brandy, who was supposed to be here, but had a conflict, was like, put on your calendar now everything that Mandisa does, because it will be the most fun, the most thoughtful, just wonderful. So, and she did not lie. And so I'm so happy to be here. But this is a topic that's close to my heart for a number of reasons. I lost my father earlier in the year. And I also was a hospice chaplain for about a decade. And I don't know if I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. And I don't know if this is a Georgia thing, but I would go to the services of all of my patients. That was just what I did for a while. And they were all the same. And these were people who I had just very deep, wonderful conversations with. And their services bear no resemblance to the people that I sat with when they were dying. Not to their belief systems, not to what they love, nothing about their story. And that was just very painful for me. Especially, it became so painful that I just stopped going to these services, because they all had the same hymns, they had the same eulogy, they had the same altar call. And one of my favorite patients, he was very vocally not Christian, but his service had only Christian elements. And so I just lift that up because, and he wasn't the only one, but that's just something that happened so much. It's something that we don't often like to talk about. And I'm so glad that people are here, because usually people see death and dying on the program, and they're like, I'm not coming to your talk. So I'm really happy that you all did. But one of the things that is so important is just having conversations about these things and designating a person that you trust to lift up what you want in your service. And so even though it was a really hard time when my father died, we had these conversations all of the time. And he had 3 things. He did not want a service in a church. He did not, he wanted to be cremated, and he wanted something. I just have to tell the story about my dad. So the week before he died, his death was unexpected for us, but not for him, clearly. But he died on a Thursday, and that Monday he told me, I don't want an in-person service because, I know people all over the world. And I kind of laughed at him like, oh, so you like that? You big like that? You're notorious on these streets? And he was like, there's no way that you're going to get everyone that I love and that loves me in a room, so don't even try. And so when he did die, it was kind of like challenge accepted. And we had a virtual service by this company called TG Beyond. And it was just so beautiful because it was what I imagined he would have wanted. We were able to get short tributes to him about him from people all over the world. And it was just so beautiful because it was human-centered and story-centered. And I still get emails with people being like, that was the best service I've ever been to. But it was because it was about his story. And it was about who he is as a person. And so designating someone we trust to celebrate our wishes. And if we are doing that for someone else, really getting to the essence of their story and not letting the people that we seeded so much of death care too, and funeral care, memorial service care, take over what that looks like. Because that's often what happens. People are called eccentric because they want something different. And the funeral homes with memorial service and the crematories just do it in this template, which doesn't fit our stories and our people.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Zeena. Do you have anything to add, Srishti?
No, I think that was beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, so next question. Oftentimes we think of memorials being somber. You know, they're these hard, horrible, events. And while there may be grief involved, how can we also incorporate joy and make these occasions festive? Anyone who would like to start?
I'm happy to jump in. So, I think ritual is so important, and it's something that religious folks have really mastered. There's so much ceremony to all sorts of religious traditions. And I think more and more as we expand our officiant capacity as well as our humanist chaplaincy capacity, I think we really need to think about the psychology of ritual and really integrate the psychology of ritual into our worldview and the conversations that we have so that we can actually make these moments, exactly as Zeena described, as human-centered and full of joy and really a true celebration of that individual as an individual and as a member of a society. And I think there are so many things that, one can do, from reading, a favorite poem or playing their favorite music or, lighting a candle or, whatever it is that really brought joy or a spark to that person's life, somehow integrating it into the ceremony and making sure that that's there. And then I think the other side of that is really taking care of the people who are left behind. So really centering them as well, and making sure that the things that, as again Zeena shared, the tributes that they're able to provide to help as part of that grieving process, helping people use this as using these ceremonies as a transition point, as creating a life with this person still in it, but just in a different form. So I think there are a number of ways that we can make these ceremonies joyful and not as somber as they need to be. I don't think it's about sort of cutting ties. It's about how do you continue to integrate these people that have, died into your life in a different way.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I just want to echo everything Srishti said. Like, there's so much. I think of that as exactly care for the people who are left. Also, community, giving an opportunity for community to really be there and show up for one another. And also creativity. I've been kind of keeping notes of funerals that I have seen that are really creative. And one I went to, there's just so many things when you think about the person and you think about the story and what was meaningful for them. And this shows me as a book nerd, but there was a service for one of my neighbors, and she had this beautiful library. And so at the service, her children had all her books, and you could take one, if you wanted them, and they had a little stamp with her name in it. So, knew that was something that was meaningful for the family. It also helped them because they're like, well, we don't get all these books. But it was just a gift from her, and you knew that was her. And so I love services like that. I officiated a service once for a caterer, and it was a big meal because he loved to eat and he loved to feed people. And so it was beautiful. And people were tipsy by the end of the night, playing cards, doing all the things. So his family was very sad, but they were also very joyful because so much of his legacy was bringing people together, caring for them, and feeding them. And so it's those things, really thinking about what did the people enjoy? And I do think religious people are good at ritual. They're not often good at imbuing that ritual with true meaning and story. And so I just think that's such an opportunity to really create the rituals that feed us, because so often people leave memorial services like, what was that? You know, because somebody's preacher gave an altar call and everybody's sitting there like, that is not it. So really, just taking back that, I think and really thinking about the care and the community and the creativity elements that we can have to bring that joy.
This reminds me of a story of something that there was a memorial that took place years ago in Louisiana. There was a woman who died, and the family knew she loved her cigarettes and her drinks. So what they did was they had a ceremony, they had like a party for her at this club, and her body was there with a cigarette in her hand and the drink. And we often think something like that would be so good and tacky and something like that. However, when we rethink ritual and we rethink, what it means to celebrate a person and what they love, I mean, it could be considered hilarious or what have you, but the family really did the right thing by her. If you think about it. Perhaps those people were ahead of their time, when it comes to stuff like this, and that in other cultures, when they celebrate the deceased, it is like a celebration. It is like it's like a big carnival or something, and that's I think that we can take lessons from that when we're rethinking what we may want as our lives end and how we want to be remembered. And speaking of which, that brings me to our last question. So how can non-religious people and even religiously progressive folk make sure their legacies and wishes are honored correctly and respectfully?
So much of what, and I'm making a plug because I want everybody to take these so I don't have to take them home. We have some end-of-life decision-making guides with compassionate choices that are available here on this table and also the table in the other room. But really what we talk a lot about with compassionate choices is having the conversation and that's about all elements, not just our memorial service or what happens after, but what happens during. And one of the things I want to say, as being a hospice chaplain, so many people are really wed to this idea of redemptive suffering, and that they have to suffer at the end of life. And so a lot of what we do is giving people toolkits so that if you are not wed to that, that does not have to be your reality. And so we do everything from medical aid in dying, everything from helping interview hospices to give people the care that they want, everything to talking it through. I know my family is tired of me talking about things like this, but one of the things that came up often with my patients is we would ask the family, because they would be in and out of consciousness, but would you rather, the nurses would ask around, would you rather them be in pain? Do you want them a little bit lucid or do you want them comfortable? And sometimes there would be a tension there. And so I'm always telling my family, I want to be comfortable. Y'all had lucid moments all the time before, so let me be comfortable. But things like that. But making those plans, putting them in writing, putting your preferences in writing is so important. And bringing your circle of support into that conversation. And knowing that your designated healthcare proxy doesn't need to be the closest person in your family, because they may not make the choices that you want them to make. But the person who will actually, that you trust to do your wishes. And so that's just one of the really important things, is designating healthcare proxies and getting that done in the here and now. We just see so many cases with people having really painful, terrible deaths because they have people not thinking in their best interest, or people who have different beliefs about what death should look like. And so that's just always, that can always be a problem. And so that's one of the most important things, is just being able to, and also moving the conversation simply from, our society has made death care planning so very legalistic, so focused on money. It's made it like in a language that doesn't make sense for our lives. And so that's another place where I really encourage people to look into their values, their stories, and their priorities to really come up with a plan that makes sense for them. If being in a hospital, if dying in a hospital is not what you want, saying that and making someone who will make that happen, putting someone in charge of that who will make that happen. All those things. We also have we are advocates for medical aid in dying, and for people who want it and qualify. And so also advocating for our state legislatures, because we have a few states where it's legal, but we're really working on just having more people have access to that as a choice. And honestly, people, like less than half of people who have that prescription take that choice, but they say that just having it, knowing that if they are suffering, that is an option, is such a powerful thing. And we find that in states that do have medical aid in dying, all end-of-life care is better. The hospice care, the palliative care, because people have choice. And so just going in with a lot of what we've been talking about this weekend, having agency and choice is so important, and having those people who are able, your chosen family, your circle of support, who know those wishes and who you trust to live them out for you.
Thank you so much for that, Zeena. Srishti.
Yeah, I absolutely second everything that Zeena said, and I want to add a few things. So again, coming out of the survey and one-on-one conversations with folks that are grieving, this idea of bodily autonomy is so important for people in our community. So, that is not limited to reproductive autonomy. It's really about bodily autonomy over the life course. And so I just wanted to center that and really, raise that up in terms of how important it is to members of our community, and really being able to frame the conversation with family and friends and trusted people in that way, I think helps to break down some of the barriers that exist. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize is, the opportunity to talk to trusted humanist chaplains. So, we do have experience thinking through existential issues, like death is the epitome of that, and the dying process as well. And so talking with those folks can be a huge source of support that is underutilized from my perspective. And then there's lots of really creative resources in society that at least I've participated in, because death and dying is really important to me. So Zeena, I'd be curious if these exist in the US, but attending death cafes. So they're an opportunity to come together. It's like a coffee chat basically, or over the lunch hour. And you sit around with okay, awesome. Yeah. You sit around with a bunch of folks and you talk about death and dying, and each sort of month they have a different theme, and it gives you an opportunity to really explore some of these issues and also find the common humanity in others. Like, people have the same fears about morbidity, and morbidity meaning illness, even before we get to death. I think other things that can be really powerful for members of our community are writing our own stories. So as I said, writing not only the history of our movements, but also our own stories, like writing our own eulogies, our own obituaries, sharing those things with our friends and family, saying, these are the things that have been important to me. If I'm not out, for example, to my family as an atheist, but leaving that for them as part of a will or something like that, can also be a really powerful way to influence, your story right until the end. And then I would encourage, I think this is an uncomfortable conversation that we don't often have in our community, but really thinking about not just your individual legacy as your person, but thinking about your financial legacy. So thinking about, you know, what organizations speak to you? Where have you dedicated your time, your life's efforts, and thinking about how you might be leaving legacy gifts to our organizations to continue to that work, whether it's for, you know, an endowment or scholarships or whatever it is that speaks to you. I really encourage people to think about that as well, because I just think it's just something that is so undervalued within our community, and I think it's really important to talk about.
And you're absolutely correct. And that is something that as an organization, we are, at Black Nonbelievers, for example, will be encouraging in the near future from members who would like to leave bequests and to continue that foundational work that we do. It is very important. That is not just relegated to religious organizations. But yes, thank you very much. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel, and Srishti and Zeena. And so we have time for a few questions. There are some questions in the audience, and also online. I'm monitoring the chat. So if you have questions online, please do post them, and we'll have enough time within these next few minutes. Hello.
Hi. As you were talking, Zeena, about people's funerals or services that had nothing to do with them, it just reminded me of my grandmother's funeral service. She was a Christian, but she was not, really Christian, and her service was so different than what she was. It was so dry, it was so boring. It was in complete opposition from, who she was. So the question I have for you is, I know you talked about taking the human approach and taking a creative approach to services, but when families are grieving, do you have any ideas as far as traditions or rituals from a humanistic or secular standpoint that a family can reach to when they want to honor a loved one and maybe they're not in a place to be creative or whatever?
That's such a wonderful question. I will say, I went to this funeral, and he was actually, his name was Buddy, and he was a Christian, actually a pastor. But what his family did was go out and plant a tree, and they gave everybody seeds, different seeds to plant in his honor. And it was such a beautiful service because we were outside, they were planting a tree, and we were all invited to do the same thing in our own yards, in our own gardens, in his honor. And it wasn't scary for the Christian folks. Like, everybody felt like everybody can participate, and it made sense. So that is one that I would recommend because it was just so well received, and people weren't, some things people want to do, people are like, oh my goodness, we're going to go to hell doing that or whatever. But that was just something that was really lovely. And another thing is, as Srishti said, there are so many humanist chaplains. Not so many, I wish there were more, absolutely. But, and I just want to say, Srishti, the 4 E's, hearing that framework was so powerful. And I wish
I'm so glad.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you. But also having someone who is skilled, like a humanist chaplain, facilitating a story sharing session can be really, like, you can do the traditional service, but having people actually be able to talk about their loved one who passed can be just a big gift. And I've been a part of a few of those. And families and circles of support have just really loved that opportunity to say, we are going to have a few snacks and just share stories. And so those are two really simple things that I think can be really powerful. And it's almost impossible to talk about someone you love and not feel the joy in the midst of the grief, because the grief, and I was going to say too, one of the things that's one of the reasons I really encourage some type of planning or conversation before, because in that time of grief, I completely understand why we cede those decisions over to a funeral home or memorial service, because it's easier. So even having some little idea before they pass can be helpful, because you're like, oh, we already talked about this and this is something we can do. But those are just two little simple things to do.
Thank you so much for that. Did you have anything to add to that, Srishti, or you're good?
I guess I'll just add there are tons of books that are available. So through Humanists UK or the AHA, there's books, there's courses. There are things that are available for non-believers. So there are entire guides on how to do, end of life planning services. So definitely encourage folks to take advantage of those. I know reading a book in those moments is perhaps not the thing that everyone goes to. But again, as Zeena said, like having folks that are chaplains or otherwise well-versed in end-of-life care, having a grief therapist that can help you through that process can also be really facilitative in making sure that things are reflective of the person who's just passed.
Yes, and also a plug for Candace Storm's book on death, dying, and disbelief. She is in the panel that is running concurrently. However, you can definitely pick up a copy of her book to learn how to, whether it's a non-religious or religious person, how you can offer care and support for people in time of grief. Next question.
Hello, ladies. It was a great talk, by the way. So I'm trying to formulate in my mind how to ask this question of you all and keep it short, but I don't think I can, but I'm just gonna try. So when my father passed away, I was a Christian and I had to plan his services. And he died Roman Catholic, so it was an overtly Roman Catholic thing. Recently, I had my eldest niece died in a car accident, and I had to plan her funeral. And even though she wasn't Christian, it was still a Christian service. So it was still a Christian, and I even had to sing Christian music, and that was difficult for many reasons, but that's not here nor there. I am now facing a sick mother, and her condition, she is going to be going into surgery sometime next year, and the surgery that she's going to have is basically going to bring her immune system way, way, way down so it can be built back up. And it's a 50-50 chance that she's going to pull through or not. And in my mind, and she's kind of approaching this too, is, let's get things together now so that just in case something happens, it won't be so chaotic and people won't be fighting over who gets what and stuff. But I find myself struggling in having a real honest conversation with her about what do you want, especially when it comes to, what that service would look like. My mother's Christian, but she's not like, radical with it. She's more like, it was very physical, like, church was like an hour and then we went home. So I am, but regardless of that, like, how is it that, some of us that who maybe not believers and, but do have parents that are, we have to kind of work through their stuff in order for us to get through, like, how, and especially like when you're close to them and things of that nature, and you don't really want to see them go, but that this is part of life. Like, how do we kind of push ourselves over that hump so that, we can have like the hard conversation with them in order to make sure things are together? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you. Yeah.
whoever wants to start first on that response. Yes.
First, I just want to let you know that I'm holding you in my heart, because that is so much. That's such a difficult conversation to begin. And even though we talk about that at Compassion Choices all the time, I talked about it as a hospice chaplain, it still didn't make it easier when I had to talk about it with my family. But often, this sounds so simplistic and cliche, but it's easier than we think it's gonna be because it's on their minds as well. So sometimes, I remember my therapist, when I felt that he was getting ill, my therapist was like, be the safe space that he can talk about death with, because he needs someone to talk about it. So, because even though I worked in hospice, I'd be like, Dad, you're gonna be here for a long time. Like, we're not even talking about that. She was like, no, stop it. Like, and when I opened that space, it was amazing how much he was willing to talk about. And so sometimes it can be as simple as asking the question. And there are lots of prompts now. I know I have, and now my brain is not working, but there are lots of like hard prompts to talk about it. Theconversation.org, they have resources to just begin the conversation, talking about like, I really hope that you're going to be here for a long time, but like, if something does happen, what would you want me to do? And those little logistical things can be really important. And I found that doing it all together, like I'm not just focused on my mom and dad, but I was also talking about it and my siblings were talking about it. And it was just like, we don't know what today, we don't know what's promised. And so I want to make sure that you have all of my insurance paperwork, you have all my passwords. This is what I want. And so talking about it kind of as, I don't know what your circle of support looks like, but having a conversation where it's not just focused on mom, but kind of focused on us all, like we've done that. And we, like that was, and it sounds awful, but like I one time did it around Thanksgiving because everybody was together. And so we were able to just kind of start asking those questions around like, what do you want? I want to make sure I know, so that I'm prepared. We are hoping that you were here for so much longer than this, but what can I do to, just to make sure, and this is what you can do for me if you're ever in that situation to have to, make decisions on my behalf.
Thank you. Any final thoughts, Srishti?
I just wanted to add that I do think that these can also be powerful learning moments and teaching moments when we're thinking about not just our generation, but also role modeling things for the next generation. So trying to include young people in some of these difficult conversations, trying to explain to them early on about the cycle of life and making it really something that is, outside of the specific incident of death and dying, just making it something that is, part of a family check-in annually, or, whatever frequency is appropriate, I think can also really help sort of in a more medium term. I don't think it necessarily addresses like the immediate situation that you were talking about. I guess the only other thing I wanted to add, because as I was listening to the story, I was anticipating something different that I had wanted to touch on, was that oftentimes when we ourselves transition from religiosity to non-religiosity, and we're thinking about death and dying, I think what we can experience, and what there are some studies on, are sort of anti-atheist discrimination that happens, and how that really exacerbates the grieving process and leads to moral injury as part of that, experience. And so I think that's just another piece that is important to acknowledge as we think about, our own transitions in regards to other people's grieving, our extended family's grieving. Certainly, as I shared earlier, when I shared with my extended family, both the Hindu side and the Liberian side, that I was going to be at this conference, it was like crickets. So I think they were really shocked. And I think, then to think about, what would it be like for them to hear that I want to donate my organs and, I want to be in community with all of my fellow atheists as part of my end of life ceremony. I think those are difficult conversations, but ones that, I think we can have with the right supports in place.
Thank you both very much for such an amazing panel. Thank you to everyone. Really take the website on Compassionate Choices and pick up the literature if you are here. Thank you very much. We will go to our break and resume back.